Australia's oldest cemeteries hide more than just bodies. They harbor secrets that defy explanation. Tonight, Nocturne Terror steps beyond the gates where over 1 million souls lie buried. But not all rest in peace. These aren't just stories. They're documented encounters that have left even skeptics questioning everything they believe about death. Welcome to Nocturne Terror, where we uncover the darkest stories hidden in shadow. I'm your name, and for 15 years I've investigated Australia's most haunted burial grounds. From the ghostly woman in white of Rookwood who searches eternally for her child, to the glowing Blue Lady of Toowong who follows visitors with phantom footsteps, we'll explore 10 cemetery hauntings backed by witnesses, historical records, and scientific evidence. What makes these cases compelling isn't just who saw them, it's what they left behind. Number 1. The Woman in White of Rookwood Cemetery. Rookwood Cemetery in Sydney isn't just Australia's largest burial ground. It's a place where the veil between worlds seems perilously thin. Established in 1867 and home to over 1 million graves, Rookwood has accumulated countless stories of the supernatural over its 150-plus-year history. Among the most frequently reported apparitions is the legendary Woman in White. In the oldest Victorian sections of the cemetery, typically around dusk, visitors have described seeing a slender figure dressed in a flowing white period dress moving between the weathered tombstones. She never acknowledges onlookers and seems focused on some unknown task. Local paranormal investigators believe she may be Emily Richardson, who lost her young daughter to typhoid fever in 1898. Historical records show Emily visited her daughter's grave daily until her own death 3 years later. Cemetery workers have reported finding fresh flowers on the child's grave even after the cemetery had been locked overnight. One particularly chilling account comes from cemetery groundskeeper Robert Daniels, who in 2014 was closing up the grounds when he spotted a woman in outdated clothing kneeling by a child's grave. Concerned that a visitor had been locked in, he approached, only to watch in horror as the figure slowly turned toward him, revealing a face described as simultaneously present and absent, before fading into the growing darkness. Those who have encountered the Woman in White describe an overwhelming feeling of maternal grief that seems to radiate outward from her presence. Several paranormal investigation teams have captured unexplained cold spots, EMF spikes, and mysterious orbs in photographs around the area where she's most commonly seen. Number 2. Captain Moonlight's Restless patrol at West Terrace Cemetery. West Terrace Cemetery in Adelaide holds the remains of Andrew George Scott, better known by his notorious alias Captain Moonlight. This infamous bushranger led a gang on a crime spree across Australia before being captured and executed in 1880 for the murder of a police officer. According to cemetery records, Scott was buried in an unmarked grave at West Terrace, standard practice for executed criminals at the time. Yet despite the lack of a headstone, his grave has become one of the most actively haunted sites in the cemetery. Security guards and late-night visitors report seeing a tall figure in period clothing pacing between graves in the older section. Unlike most apparitions that seem unaware of observers, this entity appears to actively patrol the grounds, sometimes stopping to stare directly at witnesses before continuing its rounds. In 2005, a night security guard quit his job after repeatedly encountering what he described as a man in old-fashioned clothes with a bitter expression who would appear out of nowhere and follow him on his rounds. The guard reported that the figure would emit a faint bluish glow and would vanish if directly approached. Paranormal researchers who have investigated the site have recorded unexplained voices on EVP sessions, with one particularly clear recording seeming to say "still not free" when asked if the spirit was Captain Moonlight. Temperature drops of up to 10 degrees Celsius have been measured around the presumed location of his unmarked grave, even on warm summer nights. Local legend suggests that Scott's spirit remains earthbound due to the unconsecrated nature of his burial and his violent end. Some witnesses claim to have seen him walking the perimeter of the cemetery as if still searching for escape, a final prison from which he cannot break free. Number 3. The Convict Girl of Street. John Cemetery Street. John Cemetery in Parramatta stands as Australia's oldest European burial ground, with graves dating back to 1790. Among the crumbling headstones and weathered monuments lies the unmarked grave of a young female convict whose spirit reportedly still haunts the grounds. Historical records indicate that in 1791, a 16-year-old girl named Mary Stevens was transported to Australia for stealing a loaf of bread in London. After arriving in the colony, she was assigned as a domestic servant to a wealthy family in Parramatta. Within 6 months, she died under suspicious circumstances, with official reports citing fever as the cause of death. However, rumors at the time suggested she had been mistreated by her employers and may have died from abuse. Today, visitors to St. John's Cemetery frequently report encounters with a young girl in tattered colonial-era clothing. Unlike many apparitions that appear primarily at night, the ghost of Mary Stevens, as she's come to be known, is often spotted in broad daylight, particularly on overcast days. In 2010, a school group visiting the cemetery as part of a history excursion reported an unusual incident. While taking photographs near the oldest section, several students noticed a pale, thin girl in old-fashioned clothes standing apart from their group. The teachers assumed she was from another school group, but when they reviewed their photographs later, the girl appeared in several images as a translucent figure with hollow, sorrowful eyes. No other school groups had been scheduled to visit that day. Cemetery caretakers report that fresh wildflowers occasionally appear scattered around the unmarked section where convicts were buried, despite no visitors having been recorded. Some believe these are manifestations of the young girl's spirit, still seeking the recognition and dignity denied her in life. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVP sessions where a young female voice can be heard faintly saying, "I didn't steal it, and I want to go home," adding credence to the legend of the young convict girl who never found peace. Number 4. The Blue Lady of Toowong Cemetery. Toowong Cemetery in Brisbane is Queensland's largest and oldest cemetery, established in 1866 and now home to approximately 120,000 graves. Among its winding paths and elaborate Victorian monuments lurks one of Australia's most distinctive spectral residents, the infamous Blue Lady. Unlike most cemetery apparitions that appear as misty white or gray figures, the Blue Lady of Toowong is described as having a distinctive blue aura surrounding her form. Historical research points to her likely identity as Florence Augusta Griffiths, who died tragically in 1903 from complications during childbirth. Florence's grave, marked by an angel statue, has become a focal point for paranormal activity. The most compelling accounts describe a woman in early 20th century attire wandering the pathways near her grave, surrounded by a soft blue luminescence. Her apparition is most commonly reported during the blue hour of twilight, between sunset and true darkness. In 2008, paranormal investigator Sarah Jenkins spent 3 consecutive nights in Toowong Cemetery with specialized recording equipment. On the second night, her thermal imaging camera captured a cold spot moving systematically between graves in the shape of a human figure, registering nearly 15 degrees colder than the surrounding air. The anomaly appeared bluish on thermal imaging, corresponding with eyewitness descriptions. Even more unsettling are reports from dozens of independent visitors who describe the sensation of being followed by invisible footsteps when in the vicinity of Florence's grave. The footsteps reportedly maintain a constant distance behind the visitor, stopping when they stop and continuing when they move again. Cemetery staff have documented over 40 such reports since 2000 alone. Local legend suggests that Florence searches eternally for the child she never had the chance to meet. Some visitors report hearing a woman softly humming a lullaby near her grave site, though the sound seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Number 5. The Gold Rush Miner of Ballarat Old Cemetery. The Ballarat Old Cemetery in Victoria serves as a silent testament to the tumultuous gold rush era of the 1850s, when thousands flocked to the region seeking fortune. Among its 35,000 graves lies Thomas Maynard, an English immigrant who met a violent end in 1856 during a dispute over a gold claim. According to historical accounts, Maynard was stabbed to death by a fellow miner after allegedly discovering a particularly rich vein of gold. He died before revealing the location of his find, taking the secret to his grave. Cemetery records confirm his burial in the northwestern section, marked by a simple stone now weathered almost to illegibility. Since at least the 1940s, visitors to the cemetery have reported encounters with a bearded man in dirty period clothing, carrying what appears to be mining equipment. The apparition seems engaged in a perpetual search, moving methodically between graves before disappearing into thin air when approached. In 1978, cemetery caretaker William Dobson documented in his journal an encounter with what he described as the prospector ghost while conducting routine maintenance. Saw him again today, 3rd time this month. Always moving as if searching the ground, vanishes when I call out. Always in the same section. Always looks the same, beard, dirty clothes, carrying something that looks like old mining tools. Paranormal researchers have noted unusual electromagnetic readings around Maynard's grave site, particularly during the anniversary of his death in early June. Several investigators have captured orbs and anomalous lights on camera that appear to move in a deliberate pattern through the oldest section of the cemetery. Local legend holds that Maynard's spirit remains earthbound due to his unfulfilled quest for gold and his violent end. Some believe that on particularly quiet nights, the sound of distant digging can be heard emanating from his grave site. The eternal search of a miner who never found his fortune in life, continuing his quest beyond death. Number 6. The Vanishing Convicts of Glenor Cemetery outside Hobart, Tasmania sits on land that once formed part of a secondary punishment station for convicts who committed further offenses after transportation. Established in the 1830s, the cemetery contains numerous unmarked graves of convicts who died under the harsh conditions of Tasmania's penal system. Unlike many haunted cemeteries where apparitions appear as solitary figures, Glenor is known for the appearance of multiple spectral entities moving together in what witnesses describe as a chain gang. These apparitions, typically seen at dusk, appear as a line of 5 to 7 translucent male figures dressed in tattered convict uniforms, moving slowly between the oldest graves before vanishing into the mist that frequently shrouds the cemetery. Historical research indicates that in 1842, a group of 6 convicts died during a failed escape attempt from the nearby work camp. They were buried in unmarked graves at Glenor, their deaths barely noted in official records. Cemetery archives contain a brief entry listing 6 prisoners interred following failed absconding incident, with no names recorded. In 2011, a local historical society was conducting research in the cemetery at sunset, when all 5 members independently reported seeing what appeared to be a group of men in old-fashioned prison garb walking in formation across the grounds. When approached, the figures reportedly disappeared one by one. Temperature readings taken immediately afterward showed a drop of nearly 20 degrees Celsius in the exact location where the figures had been observed. Paranormal investigators have recorded unusual electromagnetic activity in the oldest section of the cemetery, particularly around a group of unmarked depressions in the ground that may represent the convict's final resting place. Audio recordings have captured what sound like chains rattling and multiple male voices murmuring indistinctly. Cemetery caretakers report that motion-activated security cameras occasionally trigger in the middle of the night, capturing footage of mist forming into humanoid shapes before dissipating. The most active period appears to be during the anniversary of the escape attempt in late August, when visitors report feeling sudden, localized cold spots even on warm summer evenings. Number 7. The Lady in White of South Head Cemetery. Perched dramatically on the cliffs overlooking Sydney Harbour, South Head Cemetery combines breathtaking natural beauty with a disturbing supernatural presence. Established in 1868, the cemetery serves as the final resting place for many shipwreck victims, lighthouse keepers, and local residents. The most frequently reported apparition at South Head is the Lady in White, a spectral figure seen walking along the dangerous cliff edge adjacent to the cemetery. Historical research suggests she may be Eleanor Vaughan, the wife of assistant lighthouse keeper James Vaughan, who fell to her death from the cliffs in 1873 while searching for her husband during a violent storm. Eleanor's grave lies near the eastern boundary of the cemetery, marked by a simple headstone that has weathered considerably over the years. Visitors to the site frequently report seeing a woman in a white period dress pacing anxiously along the cliff path, occasionally stopping to gaze out to sea before continuing her eternal vigil. In 2004, professional photographer Melissa Harper captured what many believe to be the most compelling evidence of the Lady in White. While taking landscape photographs at sunset, Harper inadvertently captured a white, semi-transparent female figure on the cliff edge. The photograph, examined by several experts, shows no signs of manipulation, double exposure, or other technical explanations. Local tour guide James Wilson, who leads historical walks through the cemetery, has documented over 30 independent sightings of the Lady in White since beginning his tours in 1998. What's remarkable, Wilson notes, is the consistency of the descriptions. People who know nothing of the legend describe the same figure, a slender woman in her 30s wearing a white dress with her hair pulled back, always by the cliffs, always seeming distressed. Paranormal investigators have recorded EVP sessions where a female voice can be heard calling what sounds like James, the name of Eleanor's husband. When questions about the Lady in White are asked, the most active times for sightings appear to be during stormy weather, particularly when strong winds blow in from the harbor, conditions similar to those on the night of Eleanor's death. The atmosphere at South Head Cemetery is described by many visitors as heavy with grief and longing, particularly near Eleanor's grave and along the cliff path where her spirit is said to roam. Some believe she continues her search for her husband, unaware that nearly 150 years have passed since her tragic accident. Number 8. The Watcher of Karrakatta Cemetery. Karrakatta Cemetery in Perth is Western Australia's largest burial ground, established in 1899 and now containing over 200,000 graves. Among its many monuments and memorials lurks a particularly unsettling entity known simply as the Watcher. Unlike many cemetery apparitions that appear to be tied to specific graves or tragic stories, the Watcher seems to move throughout the cemetery, most frequently appearing near the graves of children. Described as a tall, dark silhouette usually spotted in peripheral vision, the Watcher never approaches directly but seems to observe from a distance, disappearing when directly looked at. Cemetery records reveal that in the early 1900s, a groundskeeper named Thomas Griffith worked at Karrakatta for over 30 years. Historical accounts describe him as a solitary figure who took particular interest in maintaining the children's section of the cemetery, often placing flowers on graves that received few visitors. After his death in 1946, he was buried in an unmarked staff plot within the cemetery grounds. The first documented sighting of the Watcher came in 1950 when a widow visiting her husband's grave reported seeing a tall man in dated clothing standing motionless among the children's graves. When she approached to ask if he needed assistance, the figure vanished. Since then, hundreds of similar reports have been filed, all describing the same basic entity: tall, dark, and watching from a distance. In 2013, a particularly compelling incident occurred when a group of high school students on a history excursion all independently reported seeing a tall figure watching them from between the graves. Their teacher saw nothing, but when photographs from the trip were developed, a dark, humanoid shadow appeared in several images, always in different locations but with the same distinctive outline. Paranormal investigators have noted that electronic equipment often malfunctions in the vicinity of the Watcher sightings. Batteries drained inexplicably, recording devices capture unusual static, and compasses have been known to spin erratically. Even more disturbing are reports of children's laughter heard throughout the cemetery, particularly after dark, despite no children being present. Cemetery staff have come to accept the Watcher as a benign presence, with many believing it to be the spirit of Thomas Griffith continuing his self-appointed duty of watching over the children's graves. Visitors to the children's section often report feeling as though they are being observed, describing it not as threatening, but as a protective presence. Number 9. The Convicts Lament at Port Arthur Cemetery. The Isle of the Dead, a small island serving as the cemetery for the Port Arthur Penal Colony in Tasmania, holds the remains of over 1,000 individuals who died at one of Australia's most notorious convict settlements. Operating from 1833 to 1877, Port Arthur was known for its harsh conditions and brutal punishments, leaving an indelible mark on the island cemetery that many believe manifests through supernatural phenomena. One of the most well-documented apparitions is that of Thomas Benbow, a convict who was hanged in 1864 for murdering a fellow prisoner. According to historical records, Benbow maintained his innocence until his death, claiming he had been framed by guards who disliked him. He was buried in an unmarked grave in the convict section of the island cemetery, without religious ceremonies or a proper headstone. Visitors to the Isle of the Dead frequently report encountering a male figure in convict attire near the unmarked section where prisoners were buried. The apparition appears solid at first glance, but vanishes when approached. Those who have seen the figure describe overwhelming feelings of injustice and rage emanating from the entity. In 2007, an archaeological team conducting a survey of the island captured an anomalous image on thermal cameras showing a human-shaped heat signature standing among the graves, despite no physical person being present. The thermal image showed a cold spot in the shape of a human figure, approximately 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding environment. Ghost tours to the island have reported consistent phenomena over decades, including the sound of chains dragging across the ground, sudden drops in temperature, and visitors experiencing inexplicable feelings of choking or difficulty breathing, symptoms similar to hanging. Particularly disturbing are EVP recordings captured by paranormal investigators, which have picked up a male voice repeatedly saying not guilty, and they lied when questions about Benbow are asked near the convict burial area. Psychics who have visited the island consistently report sensing a presence fixated on clearing its name, unable to move on due to the injustice of its fate. The isolated nature of the Isle of the Dead, accessible only by boat and surrounded by the dark waters of the Tasman Sea, adds to its foreboding atmosphere. Tour guides report that even skeptical visitors often leave the island shaken, with many describing a heavy, oppressive feeling that lifts only when they return to the mainland. Number 10. The Grieving Mother of Melbourne General Cemetery. Melbourne General Cemetery, established in 1853, is one of Australia's most historically significant burial grounds and home to the remains of many prominent Victorians. Among its elaborate monuments and mausoleums wanders the spectral figure known as the Grieving Mother. One of Australia's most consistently cited cemetery apparitions. Historical research identifies the likely source of this haunting as Eliza Weatherly, who lost all three of her children to diphtheria within a single week in 1876. According to contemporary newspaper accounts, Eliza was inconsolable after the tragedy and visited her children's graves daily until her own death 2 years later, reportedly from what doctors then called grief sickness. The family plot, marked by a small angel statue, lies in the cemetery's eastern section. Since at least the 1940s, visitors have reported seeing a woman in full Victorian mourning attire, complete with black dress, veil, and gloves kneeling beside the children's graves. The apparition appears most commonly in late afternoon, becoming visible gradually before fading away over several minutes. In 1992, cemetery groundskeeper Alan Phillips documented his encounter. I was clearing leaves when I noticed a woman in old-fashioned black clothes by the Weatherly plot. I assumed she was dressed up for some historical society thing. When I looked again a few minutes later, she was still kneeling there, completely motionless. When I walked over to check if she was all right, she simply dissolved. No other word for it, just dissolved away into nothing. Paranormal investigators have recorded unusual phenomena around the Weatherly plot, including unexplained cold spots, EMF spikes, and audio recordings of what sounds like a woman softly singing lullabies. Photography in the area frequently produces unexplained orbs and light anomalies, particularly around the angel statue marking the children's graves. What makes the Grieving Mother particularly notable is the emotional impact she has on witnesses. Many visitors report experiencing overwhelming feelings of sadness when in the vicinity of the haunting, with some being moved to tears without understanding why. Psychics who have visited the site describe sensing a profound maternal grief that has transcended death itself. Cemetery records show that fresh flowers occasionally appear on the children's graves despite no family members remaining in Australia, the last Weatherly descendant having moved overseas in the 1950s. Staff have reported finding Victorian-era children's toys, small wooden figures and cloth dolls placed on the graves, only to have them disappear days later without explanation. The Grieving Mother of Melbourne General Cemetery represents one of the most poignant types of hauntings, not a spirit seeking revenge or justice, but one bound to earth by love and loss so profound that it continues to echo across nearly 150 years. If you've experienced something unexplainable in one of Australia's historic cemeteries, share your story in the comments below. Join the Nocturne Terror community by hitting subscribe and the notification bell. We're investigating Australia's most haunted hospitals next month, and you won't want to miss it. Help us uncover more haunted locations by sharing this video with someone who loves a good ghost story. Remember, in the world of Nocturne Terror, not all spirits rest in peace.